I married him on a Thursday in October, beneath a sky so gray it seemed the heavens themselves disapproved. They told me I should feel fortunate, that girls like me, daughters of ruined houses, rarely secured such advantageous matches. The carriage that came for me that morning was black lacquered wood, with the Greystone crest embossed in silver on the door. I remember staring at that crest, the wolf with bared teeth and the Latin words beneath it that I could not read. My mother had dressed me in ivory silk that morning, her hands trembling as she fastened the pearls at my throat. She did not meet my eyes. She had not met my eyes in the 3 weeks since my father signed the contract in the study, his hand shaking so violently the ink splattered across the parchment like drops of blood. "You will be a duchess," she whispered as she adjusted my veil. "You will want for nothing." But I knew what she meant. I would want for nothing except the one thing that mattered: love, affection, the simple warmth of being chosen rather than purchased. The Duke of Greystone was 34 years old, though he looked older. I had seen him only twice before the wedding. Once at a ball 3 months prior, where he stood at the edge of the room like a statue carved from marble, his dark eyes surveying the crowd with the cold assessment of a man appraising livestock. And once in my father's study, when the arrangements were finalized. He had not spoken to me directly on either occasion. He spoke only to my father in a voice so low and measured it seemed to drain the warmth from the very air. His reputation preceded him like a winter frost. They called him merciless in business, unforgiving in his judgments, a man who valued power above all else. He had built his fortune through calculated ruthlessness, absorbing failing estates and crushing rivals without hesitation. No scandal touched him because he allowed no weakness to show. He was a fortress unto himself, and I was to be his wife. The ceremony took place in the chapel at Greystone Manor, a vast stone structure that smelled of old incense and damp earth. There were no more than 20 guests, his family cold-eyed and silent, my parents pale and grateful, a smattering of society figures who had come not to celebrate, but to witness, to confirm with their own eyes that the impoverished Ashfords had indeed secured their survival through the sacrifice of their only daughter. I walked down that aisle alone. My father had offered his arm, but I refused it. If I was to be sold, I would at least walk to my fate with my head high. The Duke waited at the altar in black velvet and silver brocade. His hair was dark, almost black, worn slightly longer than fashion dictated. His face was angular, handsome in the way that sharp things are handsome, beautiful, and dangerous at once. When I reached him, he did not smile. He simply extended his hand, palm up, and waited. I placed my hand in his. His fingers were cold. The vicar's voice echoed through the chapel, droning through the ancient words of binding and covenant. I repeated my vows in a voice that did not sound like my own. The Duke's responses were clipped, efficient, as though he were closing a business transaction rather than entering a sacrament. When the vicar pronounced us husband and wife, the Duke lifted my veil with a mechanical precision. He looked at me then, truly looked at me, for the first time. His eyes were slate gray, the color of storms over the North Sea. For a moment, something flickered there, some emotion I could not name. Then it vanished, shuttered behind that impenetrable facade. He kissed me. It was brief, cold, perfunctory. His lips barely grazed mine before he pulled away. The wedding breakfast was an exercise in exquisite torture. We sat at the head of a table laden with silver and crystal, surrounded by guests who spoke in murmurs and watched us with hungry, curious eyes. The Duke did not speak to me. He spoke to the gentleman on his left about matters of parliament and trade routes. I sat in silence, my hands folded in my lap, feeling the weight of the ring on my finger like a shackle. Across the table, his grandmother, the Dowager Duchess, observed me with eyes like chips of ice. She was ancient, draped in black silk and diamonds, her face a map of severity and judgment. When our eyes met, she did not smile. She simply inclined her head, a gesture that felt more like a warning than a welcome. "You will learn your place here," her expression seemed to say. "You will learn, or you will break." The afternoon stretched into evening. At last, the guests began to depart, their carriages rolling away down the long drive beneath a sky now dark as ink. My parents were among the last to leave. My mother embraced me, her body thin and brittle as kindling. She pressed her lips to my ear. "Be grateful. Eveline, be obedient. Make us proud." Then she was gone, and I stood in the grand entrance hall of Greystone Manor, alone with my husband. He did not look at me. He turned and walked toward the staircase, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor. A servant appeared at my elbow, a woman of perhaps 50 with a kind but cautious face. "I will show you to your chambers, Your Grace." Your Grace. The title felt like a costume I had not yet learned to wear. I followed her up the sweeping staircase, down corridors lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors who seemed to judge me as I passed. The house was enormous, cold despite the fires burning in every grate. It smelled of beeswax and old wood, and something else, something I could not name. Loneliness, perhaps. Secrets. My chambers were at the end of the east wing. The bedroom was vast, dominated by a canopied bed draped in emerald velvet. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The servant helped me out of my wedding gown, unlacing the stays with practiced efficiency. She draped a nightgown over my shoulders, white silk that whispered against my skin. "His Grace will come to you shortly," she said softly. Then she curtsied and left, closing the door behind her with a quiet click. I stood alone in that grand room, feeling smaller than I had ever felt in my life. I walked to the window and looked out over the grounds. The moon had risen, casting silver light over manicured gardens and distant woods. Somewhere out there, beyond those woods, was the world I had known. The modest house where I had grown up. The village where I knew every face, every name. It felt impossibly far away now, as though I had crossed not miles but worlds. I heard the door open behind me. I did not turn. I could not. His footsteps were soft on the carpet. He stopped a few feet behind me. I could feel his presence, solid and unyielding as stone. "You are crying." His voice startled me. I had not realized tears were sliding down my cheeks. I reached up to brush them away, ashamed. "I am not," I said, though my voice betrayed me. A long silence stretched between us. I waited for him to speak, to command, to take what he had purchased. But he did not move. When he spoke again, his voice was different, quieter, almost uncertain. "Why did you agree to this marriage?" I turned then, surprised by the question. He stood in the shadows near the door, still fully dressed, his face half hidden in darkness. I could not read his expression. "You know why," I said. "My father's debts, my family's survival. I had no choice. Everyone has a choice." I felt anger flare in my chest, hot and sudden. It was the first strong emotion I had allowed myself all day. "Do they?" I asked. "Do they really? Or is that something powerful men tell themselves to justify their actions?" He said nothing. The silence stretched, taut as a wire. "I did not want this either," he said at last. His voice was flat, emotionless, but it was necessary. I needed a wife of appropriate station. You needed security. It is an arrangement that benefits us both. "Benefits," I repeated. The word tasted bitter. "Is that what you call it? What would you call it?" I looked at him, this stranger who was now my husband, this man who held my entire future in his cold hands. I thought of 100 things I could say. I thought of rage and grief and the desperate hope that somewhere beneath his armor of ice there might be something human, something reachable. But I said none of those things. Instead, I turned back to the window. "I would call it survival," I said quietly. Another silence. Then I heard him move toward the door. "I will leave you to rest," he said. "You have had a long day." I spun around, shocked. "Are you not going to consummate the marriage?" He said it as though discussing the weather. "There is time enough for that. Tonight, you will sleep alone." He opened the door, paused on the threshold without looking back. "Good night, Lady Greystone." Then he was gone, and I was alone in the vast bed, staring at the canopy above me, wondering what kind of man would marry for power but hesitate at its consummation, wondering if perhaps there was more to the Duke of Greystone than the world believed, or if this was simply another form of cruelty, drawing out my uncertainty, keeping me suspended between duty and relief. I did not sleep that night. I lay in the darkness, listening to the house settle around me, feeling the weight of my new life pressing down on my chest like stones. And I wondered, as the hours crawled toward dawn, if I would ever feel anything in this place besides cold. The sun rose pale and weak through the windows. A maid arrived with tea and toast, her eyes downcast, her manner deferential. She helped me dress in a morning gown of soft gray wool, styled my hair in a simple arrangement. She did not speak unless spoken to. I had the sense that silence was a survival skill here, that words were dangerous things best left unspoken. I was summoned to breakfast in the smaller dining room. The Duke was already there, reading correspondence beside his plate. He did not look up when I entered. I took my seat at the opposite end of the table, the distance between us vast and symbolic. A footman served me eggs and kippers I could not eat. I sipped my tea and watched my husband from beneath lowered lashes. In the morning light, he looked tired. There were shadows beneath his eyes, lines at the corners of his mouth that suggested sleeplessness. I wondered if he had slept any better than I had. He set down his letter and finally looked at me. His gaze was assessing, clinical. "My grandmother wishes to meet with you this morning," he said. "She will instruct you on your duties as Duchess. You will attend her at 10 o'clock in the drawing room." I nodded. "Yes, Your Grace." Something flickered in his eyes at the formal address. Irritation, perhaps, or something else. "You may call me Greystone," he said. "Or if you prefer, my given name is Adrian." I considered this. Adrian. It was a softer name than I expected. It did not suit him. "I will call you Greystone," I said. He nodded once, as though that was the answer he expected. He returned to his correspondence. I returned to my untouched breakfast. We sat in silence, two strangers bound by law and necessity, separated by a table and an ocean of unspoken things. When the clock chimed the half-hour, he rose. "Business matters require my attention," he said. "I will be in London for the next 3 days. The household staff will attend to your needs." He walked toward the door, then paused. Without turning, he spoke again. "That tear last night." His voice was carefully neutral. "Was it for what you have lost, or for what you have gained?" I stared at his back, at the rigid set of his shoulders, and for a moment I glimpsed something beneath his coldness. Uncertainty. Perhaps even fear. "Both," I said softly. He said nothing more. He simply left, his footsteps fading down the corridor, and I was alone once more in this vast, cold house that was now my home. Alone with my regrets and my duties, and the ghost of a single tear that had somehow, impossibly, reached through the Duke's armor to touch something he thought he had buried long ago. I did not know it then, but that tear was the first crack in his fortress, and I, unknowing and unwilling, had just begun the slow work of breaking him open. The Dowager Duchess received me in the drawing room precisely at 10 o'clock. She sat in a high-backed chair, upholstered in crimson velvet, positioned before the fire like a queen upon a throne. She did not rise when I entered. She simply watched me cross the room, her gaze sharp as broken glass. "Sit," she commanded, gesturing to a chair opposite her. I sat. My hands folded themselves in my lap of their own accord, seeking some anchor against the scrutiny of those cold eyes. "You are younger than I expected," she said. "How old are you?" 22, Your Grace, 22. She made a sound that might have been amusement or disdain. I was married at 16, widowed at 25. I raised my son alone and preserved this family's position through 2 wars and 3 financial panics. Do you know what that required? Strength, I ventured. Ruthlessness, she corrected. Strength is for horses. Ruthlessness is for duchesses. She leaned forward slightly. My grandson has made a practical choice in marrying you. Your bloodline is acceptable if impoverished. You are young enough to bear heirs. You are plain enough not to attract undue attention or inspire jealousy among society women. In short, you are suitable. The words landed like blows, each one carefully aimed. Plain enough. Suitable. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, but kept my expression neutral. Thank you, Your Grace. That was not a compliment, child. It was an assessment. She settled back in her chair. Now, let us discuss what is expected of you. You will manage the household with competence and discretion. You will entertain when required and present yourself as a credit to this family. You will produce an heir within 2 years. You will not embarrass us with scandal or sentiment. Above all, you will remember that you are here because you are useful, not because you are loved. The last words hung in the air between us. I felt something inside me harden, crystallize like ice. I understand, I said quietly. Do you? Her eyes narrowed. I wonder. You have the look of a girl who still believes in fairy stories. Let me disabuse you of that notion. My grandson is not a prince waiting to be awakened by true love's kiss. He is a duke. He has responsibilities that dwarf any personal inclinations he might possess. He married you for strategic reasons. You would do well to remember that and not complicate matters with romantic delusions. I met her gaze steadily. I have no delusions, Your Grace. I know exactly why I am here. Something flickered in her expression. Approval, perhaps. Or merely reassessment. Good. Then we understand each other. She reached for a small bell on the table beside her and rang it. The housekeeper will show you the house. You will learn your duties. You will perform them adequately, or you will answer to me. Dismissed. I rose, curtsied, and left the room. My legs carried me through the doorway and down the hall, but my mind remained behind, replaying every cutting word. Plain enough. Useful, not loved. Do not complicate matters with romantic delusions. I had known these things, of course. But hearing them spoken aloud, weaponized by a woman who had survived decades in this gilded prison, made them real in a way they had not been before. The housekeeper, Mrs. Hallowell, met me in the corridor. She was the woman who had attended me on my wedding night, her face kind but carefully neutral. She showed me through the house room by room. The grand ballroom with its crystal chandeliers and mirrors that multiplied emptiness into infinity. The library with its thousands of leather-bound volumes and the faint smell of pipe tobacco. The music room with a pianoforte that looked untouched. The conservatory where winter roses bloomed in defiance of the season. Each room was beautiful. Each room was cold. This is where the late Duke took his breakfast, Mrs. Hallowell said, as we passed a small sunlit room overlooking the gardens. His Grace the current Duke prefers to breakfast in the main dining room. The late Duke, I repeated. The Duke's father. What was he like? Mrs. Hallowell's expression closed like a door. That is not for me to say, Your Grace. But I pressed. Was he kind? Was he loved? She hesitated, choosing her words with care. He was respected. He maintained the family's position. He did his duty. Then, more softly, he was not an easy man. And the Duke's mother? She died when His Grace was 10 years old. Fever took her in the winter. After that, the late Duke became harder, and the boy had only his grandmother. I thought of Adrian then, a 10-year-old boy losing his mother and being left with a cold father and a ruthless grandmother. I thought of how such a childhood might shape a man, might teach him that love was weakness and power was survival. Mrs. Hallowell showed me the Duchess's chambers last. They adjoined the Duke's rooms through a connecting door that was locked from his side. The chambers were lovely, decorated in shades of blue and silver, with windows overlooking the rose garden. A escritoire stood near the window, stocked with fine paper and ink. "You will find everything you need here," Mrs. Hallowell said. "If you require anything else, you have only to ring." She left me alone then. I wandered the rooms, touching the furniture, examining the paintings on the walls, trying to imagine making a life in this beautiful cage. I opened the wardrobe and found it filled with gowns I had never seen before. Silks and velvets in jewel tones, day dresses and evening gowns, all in my size. They must have been made before the wedding, measured and sewn while the contracts were being negotiated. Even my clothing had been chosen for me, part of the transaction. I sat at the escritoire and looked out over the garden. The roses were dormant now, cut back for winter, their stems like skeletal fingers reaching from the frozen earth. I thought about writing to my mother, then thought better of it. What would I say? That I was lonely. That my husband would not touch me and his grandmother had called me plain? That I was beginning to understand what it meant to be useful but not loved? Instead, I took out a sheet of paper and began to write something else. Not a letter, but simply thoughts, observations, the small truths I could not speak aloud. I wrote about the cold hallways and the watching portraits. I wrote about my husband's gray eyes and the tear that had somehow affected him. I wrote about the dowager's cruelty and Mrs. Hallowell's carefully hidden kindness. I wrote until my hand ached and the light began to fade, until I had emptied some small portion of the loneliness from my chest onto the page. Then I folded the paper and hid it in the bottom of the escritoire drawer, beneath the fresh sheets. My secret, at least, my voice, at least, even if no one would ever read it. The days passed in a strange rhythm. The Duke remained in London. I learned the house and the routines. I met with the cook and approved menus I did not care about. I reviewed household accounts and signed my new name with a hand that grew steadier with practice. Lady Greystone, the Duchess. I wore the title like an ill-fitting gown, hoping I would grow into it. In the evenings, I dined alone at that vast table. Afterward, I retreated to the library and lost myself in books. I read everything: poetry and philosophy, novels and histories. I read until my eyes burned and the fire died down to embers. Reading was escape. Reading was companionship. Reading reminded me that somewhere beyond these walls there were people who felt deeply, who loved and suffered and chose their own fates. On the fourth day, a letter arrived. It bore the Greystone seal and was addressed in an unfamiliar hand. I opened it in the morning room, my heart beating faster than it should. "Lady Greystone," it began, "I will return to Greystone Manor tomorrow evening. There is to be a dinner party on Saturday. My grandmother has prepared the guest list. You will act as hostess. I trust you will acquit yourself appropriately. Greystone." No warmth, no personal note. Simply information delivered with the efficiency of a business memorandum. I set the letter aside and stared out the window at the gray sky. So, my first test. I would be presented to society as the new Duchess, examined and judged by the very people who had witnessed my transactional wedding. I spent the next day in preparation. I met with Mrs. Hallowell and reviewed the arrangements. I consulted with the cook about the menu. I selected a gown from the wardrobe, a deep sapphire silk that made my pale skin look almost luminous. I practiced sitting with perfect posture, speaking with measured tones, smiling without warmth. I became what they needed me to be, a duchess, a symbol, a useful ornament. The Duke arrived as the sun set on Friday evening. I heard the carriage on the drive and felt my stomach clench with an emotion I could not name. Nervousness, yes, but also something else. Anticipation, perhaps, or dread. I waited in the drawing room, standing near the fire in a gown of burgundy velvet. I had dressed carefully, arranged my hair in a style that was elegant but not ostentatious. I wanted him to see that I could do this, that I could be what he needed. He entered the room still in his traveling clothes, dusty and tired. He stopped when he saw me, and for a moment something passed across his face. Surprise, perhaps, or appreciation, but it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "My lady," he said, inclining his head. "Your Grace," I replied. "I hope your journey was pleasant." It was tedious. He moved to the sideboard and poured himself a brandy. "I understand everything is prepared for tomorrow." "Yes, the menu is selected. The staff are ready. I have reviewed the guest list with your grandmother." He drank, watching me over the rim of his glass. "And you are prepared?" "I am." He set down the glass and crossed to stand before the fire, close enough that I could smell the road dust on his coat, the faint scent of his cologne, bergamot and something darker, leather perhaps. "There will be 20 guests," he said. "Lords and ladies of consequence. They will watch you closely. They will judge every word, every gesture. Some will hope you fail. My grandmother's friends will be looking for any sign of vulgarity or impropriety. The younger set will be curious about the girl who trapped the untouchable Duke." "I did not trap you," I said quietly. His eyes met mine, startled by the contradiction. "No," he said after a moment. "No, you did not. But that is not how they will see it. Then I will show them otherwise." He studied me for a long moment. "How will you do that?" "By being exactly what I am," I said. "A woman who married for duty and accepted her fate with dignity. A woman who knows her place and performs it well. They may not like me, but they will find no fault with my conduct." Something shifted in his expression. The coldness thawed, just slightly, and I saw the shadow of something else beneath it. Respect, perhaps, or recognition. "You are stronger than you look," he said softly. "I have to be," I replied. We stood there in the firelight, two people bound by duty, separated by fear, and for the first time, I felt the faintest possibility that we might understand each other. That beneath his armor and my resignation, there might be two human beings trying to survive the circumstances that had brought us together. The moment passed. He stepped back, the coldness returning like frost across glass. "I will see you at dinner," he said. Then he was gone, leaving me alone with the crackling fire and the weight of tomorrow pressing down on my shoulders. That night, I lay awake again, rehearsing conversations in my mind. I imagined every possible question, every subtle insult, every trap that might be laid for me. I prepared myself for battle because that was what tomorrow would be, not a dinner party, a battlefield, and I was determined not to be found wanting. When I finally slept, I dreamed of wolves and winter gardens, of locked doors and letters written in invisible ink. I dreamed of my husband's gray eyes watching me with an expression I could not read, and of a single tear falling like a stone into still water, sending ripples outward into the dark. I woke before dawn, my heart racing. Somewhere in the house, I heard footsteps. The Duke was awake too, pacing his chambers, preparing for his own battles. We were soldiers in the same war, fighting on the same side, yet standing on opposite sides of a locked door. I rose and went to the window. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the frozen garden in shades of rose and gold. It was beautiful, this place. It was also a prison. And I was beginning to understand that my husband was as much a prisoner here as I was, bound by duty and expectation and the weight of a name that demanded perfection. The day would come, I thought. The day when one of us would find the courage to unlock that door, to reach across the distance and risk the vulnerability of being seen. But today was not that day. Today, I had a part to play, and I would play it flawlessly, for both of us. The guests began arriving at 7 o'clock. I stood beside my husband in the entrance hall, my hand resting lightly on his arm, a portrait of conjugal unity that felt as fragile as spun glass. He was resplendent in black evening clothes, his cravat tied in a perfect knot, his dark hair brushed back from his face. He looked every inch the powerful Duke, untouchable and commanding. I wore the sapphire gown I had chosen, with the Greystone diamonds at my throat, cold stones that pressed against my skin like warnings. The first to arrive were Lord and Lady Pemberton, an elderly couple who had known the late Duke. Lady Pemberton embraced the dowager with genuine warmth, then turned to examine me with eyes that missed nothing. "So you are the new Duchess," she said, taking my hands in hers. "My dear, you are lovelier than the rumors suggested." I smiled, grateful for the unexpected kindness. "You are generous, Lady Pemberton." "Not at all. I simply speak truth." She glanced at the Duke, then back to me, and something knowing passed across her face. "I hope Greystone Manor treats you kindly, child. It can be a cold house for those unused to its ways." Before I could respond, more guests arrived. The Marquis of Ashford and his wife, Lord Hastings and his 2 daughters, both unmarried and eyeing the Duke with barely concealed longing. Sir Edward Thornfield and his much younger wife, a woman whose beauty was as sharp as her gaze. They came in waves, these lords and ladies, and I greeted each one with practiced grace, my smile fixed, my words measured, my heart beating beneath my ribs like a trapped bird. The Duke introduced me with cool efficiency. My wife, Lady Greystone. Nothing more, no endearments, no warmth, simply a statement of fact. We moved into the drawing room for aperitifs. I accepted a glass of champagne I did not want, and stood beside a window, observing. The guests clustered in groups, their conversations a hum of gossip and politics. I felt their eyes on me, assessing, judging. The Hastings daughters whispered behind their fans. Sir Edward's wife examined me with the cold appraisal of a woman measuring competition. The dowager materialized at my elbow, like a specter in black silk. "You are doing adequately," she murmured. "But do not simply stand here like furniture. Circulate, engage, make them see you as more than an ornament." I wanted to ask how I was supposed to be more than an ornament when I had been purchased to serve exactly that function. But I simply nodded and moved into the crowd. I joined a conversation between Lady Pemberton and 2 other women, discussing the latest fashions from Paris. I offered opinions that were informed but not too strong, agreed where appropriate, deflected when necessary. I was pleasant, I was suitable, I was exactly what they expected. "Your Grace," a voice said behind me. I turned to find Sir Edward, his smile too practiced, his eyes too interested. "May I say you are a vision this evening? Greystone is a fortunate man." "You are kind, Sir Edward." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I confess I was surprised by the marriage. The Duke has resisted the institution for so long. You must possess some extraordinary quality to have captured him at last." There was an implication in his words, something oily and insinuating. I felt my spine stiffen. "I possess nothing extraordinary," I said coolly. "His Grace made a practical choice. I am merely the beneficiary of that choice." "Practical," he repeated, amusement dancing in his eyes. How very like Greystone. "Tell me, does practicality extend to all aspects of the marriage?" I understood his meaning perfectly. Heat rose in my cheeks, but I kept my voice steady. "That is hardly an appropriate question, Sir Edward. Is it not? We are all friends here after all, and one cannot help but wonder if the famously cold Duke has thawed in the warmth of matrimony." Before I could respond, a hand closed around Sir Edward's shoulder. The Duke stood there, his expression pleasant, but his eyes hard as flint. "Sir Edward," he said quietly, "I believe your wife is looking for you." Sir Edward had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Of course, Your Grace." He bowed to me. "My lady." He retreated, and I found myself alone with my husband. The Duke did not release his rigid posture immediately. He watched Sir Edward's departure with an expression I could not decipher. "What did he say to you?" he asked, his voice low. "Nothing of consequence," I replied. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something fierce in his gaze. "If any man speaks to you with disrespect, you will tell me." It was a command, not a request. But beneath the command, I heard something else. Protection. Possessiveness, perhaps. Or something more complex. "I can handle impertinent men," I said softly. "I am certain you can. But you should not have to." His jaw tightened. "You are the Duchess of Greystone. That position demands respect, and I will ensure you receive it." Before I could respond, dinner was announced. He offered me his arm, and I took it, feeling the tension in his muscles beneath the fabric of his coat. We processed into the dining room, taking our places at the head of the long table. I sat at the far end opposite him, separated by 20 feet of polished mahogany and silver candlesticks. The meal was exquisite. Course after course appeared, each more elaborate than the last. Turtle soup, roasted pheasant, asparagus in cream sauce, syllabub and tiny cakes dusted with sugar. I ate sparingly, too aware of the conversation swirling around me, the glances that flickered in my direction. The Marquis of Ashford, seated to my right, proved to be a kind man. He spoke to me of his estate in Derbyshire, of his grandchildren, of his love for hunting. He asked about my own family with genuine interest, and I found myself relaxing slightly in his presence. "Your father is Lord Ashford of Thornfield, is he not?" he asked. "I knew him years ago. A good man, unfortunate about his losses." "Yes," I said quietly. "The losses were considerable, and yet here you are, a duchess. Some might say fortune smiled upon you after all." I met his eyes. Some might say that, yes. He studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "You have steel in you, child. You will need it in this house." Across the table, I caught my husband's eye. He had been watching our exchange, his expression unreadable. When our eyes met, something passed between us. Not warmth, but acknowledgement. A recognition of the performance we were both engaged in, the roles we played for an audience that would never see beneath the masks. The dinner continued. Wine flowed. Conversations grew louder, more animated. The dowager held court at the center of the table, telling stories of past glories and subtle put-downs disguised as reminiscences. The Hastings daughters giggled and flirted with Lord Hastings's neighbor, a young earl with more fortune than sense. Sir Edward drank too much and grew increasingly boorish until his wife placed a restraining hand on his arm and whispered something sharp in his ear. I observed it all from my position at the end of the table, feeling like an actress in a play I had not auditioned for. This was my life now. These people, these performances, this elaborate dance of manners and hidden meanings. I would attend dinners like this for years to come. I would smile and converse and play the gracious hostess. I would grow old in this house, surrounded by beauty and wealth and a loneliness so profound it would hollow me out from the inside. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I could do this. I could survive this. I had survived worse things. Poverty, shame, the slow degradation of watching my family crumble. This, at least, was survival wrapped in silk and diamonds. There were worse fates. After dinner, the ladies withdrew to the drawing room while the gentlemen remained for port and cigars. I led the procession, feeling the weight of every eye on my back. In the drawing room, tea was served. Lady Pemberton patted the seat beside her, and I gratefully accepted. "You handled yourself beautifully tonight," she said quietly. "But I imagine you are exhausted." "I am," I admitted. "It will become easier," she assured me. "These performances always do. We become skilled at wearing our masks." "Is that what marriage is?" I asked before I could stop myself. "Wearing masks," she smiled sadly. "All of life is wearing masks, my dear. The trick is finding someone with whom you can occasionally remove yours." Her eyes drifted toward the doorway, where the gentleman would eventually emerge. I was fortunate. Pemberton and I had that. I hope, in time, you and Greystone might find it too. I did not know how to respond to that. Hope seemed like such a fragile thing, too delicate to grasp. The Hastings daughters approached, their pretty faces arranged in expressions of friendly curiosity. "Your Grace," the elder said, "we were hoping you might play for us. We understand there is a pianoforte in the music room." It was a test, of course. They wanted to assess my accomplishments, to find some flaw in my execution. "I would be delighted," I said. We moved to the music room, a small crowd of ladies following. I sat at the pianoforte, my hands trembling slightly as I arranged my skirts. I had not played in months, but my mother had insisted on music lessons, even as our fortunes dwindled, and my fingers remembered what my mind had forgotten. I chose a Mozart sonata, something technically demanding but emotionally restrained. My hands moved across the keys, and the music filled the room, bright and precise and controlled. I poured everything into it that I could not say. My loneliness, my fear, my desperate hope that somewhere beneath his coldness, my husband might see me as something more than a practical choice. When I finished, there was a moment of silence, then applause, genuine and warm. Lady Pemberton smiled. The Hastings daughters looked disappointed. Even Lady Thornfield, Sir Edward's beautiful wife, inclined her head in acknowledgement. The gentlemen rejoined us then, drawn by the music. The Duke stood in the doorway, his eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made my breath catch. He did not applaud. He simply watched me, and in his gaze I saw something I had not seen before. Surprise, and something deeper. Recognition, perhaps. As though the music had revealed something about me he had not expected to find. The evening drew to a close. Guests departed in their carriages, their farewells effusive and insincere. The dowager retired, offering me a curt nod that I chose to interpret as approval. The household staff began clearing the rooms, efficient and nearly invisible. I stood in the entrance hall, suddenly exhausted. The performance was over. I had survived, but the weight of what lay ahead pressed down on me with renewed force. "You played beautifully," a voice said behind me. I turned. The Duke stood at the foot of the staircase, his cravat loosened, his evening coat unbuttoned. He looked tired, the careful control slipping just slightly. "Thank you," I said. He crossed to stand before me. "Where did you learn?" my mother insisted. She believed accomplishments were a form of armor. She was wise. He studied me for a long moment. "You did well tonight. Better than I expected." "I am capable of learning my role, Your Grace." "Adrian," he said quietly. "When we are alone, you may call me Adrian." It was an offering, small but significant. I considered refusing, maintaining the distance that kept us both safe. But something in his eyes stopped me. Vulnerability, perhaps, or loneliness that mirrored my own. "Adrian," I repeated softly. The name felt strange on my tongue, too intimate, too human. "Eveline," he said, and hearing my name from his lips sent a strange shiver through me. His voice was different when he said it. Gentler, almost tender. We stood there in the quiet hall, the house settling around us, and for the first time since our wedding, I felt the possibility of something other than cold duty stretching between us. "Sir Edward was inappropriate," he said abruptly. "I apologize for his behavior." "You are not responsible for his behavior. I am responsible for your protection. You are my wife." The words should have sounded possessive, territorial. Instead, they sounded almost like a vow. "I can protect myself," I said, though my voice was softer than I intended. "I know. I saw that tonight. But you should not have to." His hand lifted, as though he might touch my face, then fell back to his side. He seemed to struggle with something, some internal battle I could not see. "Then I should bid you good night." "Adrian," I said, surprising myself. "Wait." He turned back, his expression guarded but attentive. "Why did you leave me alone on our wedding night?" The question hung between us, raw and necessary. He was silent for so long I thought he would not answer. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because I saw that tear, and I realized that I had become the very thing I despised. A man who takes what he wants without regard for the cost. He met my eyes, and in them I saw anguish carefully contained. I thought if I gave you time, if I showed you that small mercy, perhaps it would ease the violence of what I had done in marrying you. It was not violent, I said. It was necessary. That does not make it kind. He looked away. I have never aspired to kindness. I thought power was enough. But when I saw you crying, I understood that power without humanity is simply cruelty. And I find I do not wish to be cruel to you. My heart beat faster. I took a step toward him, closing the distance by inches. Then what do you wish to be to me? He looked at me, and in that moment I saw the fortress crack, the armor split, and beneath it a man as lost and lonely as I was. I do not know, he admitted, but I would like to discover it, if you are willing. I thought of all the reasons to refuse, to maintain my distance, to protect myself from the inevitable pain of hoping for something that might never come. But standing there in the dim hall, seeing his vulnerability laid bare, I found I could not turn away. I am willing, I whispered. Something shifted in his expression. Relief, gratitude, and something else, something warmer that I was afraid to name. Then we will begin again, he said, not as strangers bound by contract, but as two people trying to find their way in an impossible situation. I nodded, not trusting my voice. He reached out slowly, giving me time to pull away. When I did not, his hand cupped my cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear I had not realized had fallen. His touch was gentle, reverent, nothing like the cold efficiency of our wedding kiss. "Good night, Eveline," he said softly. Then he turned and climbed the stairs, leaving me alone in the hall with my racing heart and the ghost of his touch on my skin. I touched my cheek where his hand had been, and felt something shift inside me. Hope, perhaps, or simply the recognition that the fortress was not as impregnable as it seemed. That somewhere beneath the stone and ice there was a man who might learn to feel, and a woman who might teach him. The road ahead would be long. Trust could not be built in a single conversation, but it was a beginning. And beginnings, I was learning, were everything. The days that followed were different, not transformed but subtly altered, like light shifting through water. Adrian did not leave for London. He remained at Greystone Manor, and for the first time since our marriage, we inhabited the same spaces without the careful choreography of avoidance. We began taking breakfast together, not at opposite ends of that vast table, but at a smaller table in the morning room, where sunlight streamed through tall windows and made patterns on the floor. He still read his correspondence, but occasionally he would look up and share some piece of news. A vote in Parliament, a business matter that required his attention. Small things, but they felt like confidences, like the slow opening of a door that had been locked for so long. I told him about the household, about Mrs. Hallowell's efficient management and the cook's temperamental nature. I mentioned books I was reading, observations about the estate. He listened with an attention that surprised me, asking questions that proved he was truly hearing what I said. One morning, as frost painted the windows in crystalline patterns, he set down his cup and looked at me with an expression I could not quite read. "Would you like to see the estate?" he asked. "Properly, I mean, not just the gardens." "I would," I said, surprised by how much I meant it. We rode out that afternoon on horses from the Greystone stables. Mine was a gentle mare named Whisper, gray as morning mist. His was a black stallion that suited him perfectly, powerful and barely controlled. We rode through dormant fields and bare woods, the cold air stinging my cheeks and making me feel more alive than I had in weeks. He showed me the tenant farms, introduced me to families who had lived on Greystone land for generations. They were cautious at first, these people, but kind. They curtsied and bowed, called me Your Grace with voices that held both respect and reservation. I was an unknown quantity, the new duchess who had appeared without warning, and they would wait to see what kind of woman I proved to be. At one farm, a woman with a baby on her hip offered us cider and bread. We sat in her simple kitchen while she told us about her husband's plans for the spring planting, about her eldest son who wanted to apprentice with the blacksmith. Adrian listened with genuine interest, asked questions about yields and crop rotation, promised to send the estate manager to discuss improvements to their cottage. When we left, the woman pressed a small loaf of bread into my hands. "Welcome to Greystone, Your Grace," she said. "I hope you will be happy here." The simple kindness of it made my throat tight. I thanked her and tucked the bread carefully into my saddlebag. As we rode back toward the manor, Adrian was quiet. I watched him from the corner of my eye, this man who was slowly becoming less of a stranger. The wind had disheveled his dark hair, and there was color in his cheeks from the cold. He looked younger somehow, less burdened. "You are good with them," I said. "The tenants. They respect you." He glanced at me, surprised. "I do my duty by them. That is all." "It is more than duty," I insisted. "You listen to them. You see them as people, not simply sources of income." He was silent for a long moment. "My father saw them as assets on a ledger," he said finally, "numbers to be optimized. When I inherited, I swore I would be different." He looked out over the fields, his expression distant. "Power means nothing if it is not tempered with responsibility. These people depend on me. I will not fail them." There was something in his voice, some old pain, and I understood that his coldness was not cruelty, but armor. He had learned early that caring meant vulnerability, that love meant loss. So he had built his fortress and called it duty, convinced himself that responsibility was enough to fill the emptiness. "You have not failed them," I said softly, "and you will not." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and something passed between us. Understanding, perhaps, or simply the recognition that we were both trying to be more than our circumstances had made us. That evening, we dined together in the smaller dining room. The dowager had gone to visit a friend in the neighboring county, and her absence changed the atmosphere of the house. The walls seemed to breathe more easily without her stern presence. After dinner, Adrian surprised me by suggesting we take tea in the library. We settled into chairs before the fire, and he poured brandy for himself, sherry for me. The flames cast dancing shadows on the rows of books, and I felt a contentment I had not expected to find here. "Do you miss your family?" he asked suddenly. The question caught me off guard. I considered lying, offering some polite platitude. But his eyes held genuine curiosity, and I found I wanted to be honest with him. "I miss my mother," I said. "She was not always kind, but she loved me in her way. My father, I miss less. He was a good man once, but the debts changed him, made him desperate and small." "And do they write to you?" "My mother writes once a week, letters full of gratitude and advice I did not ask for. She tells me to be obedient, to remember my duty, to make them proud. She never asks if I am happy. Are you?" His voice was careful, as though he was afraid of the answer. "Happy?" I met his gaze. "I am learning to be content. That is perhaps more valuable than happiness." "That is a sad answer, Eveline. It is an honest one." He set down his glass and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his expression intent. "I want you to be more than content. I want you to find something here worth having. Not just duty and resignation, but something real." "Why?" I asked. "Why should it matter to you if I am happy or simply resigned?" He was silent for a long time. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed the hour. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Because I have been resigned my entire life, and I am beginning to understand how hollow that is. Because when I saw you play the pianoforte, I saw passion and pain and beauty, and I realized that you are capable of feeling things I have spent years trying to bury. And because I think, perhaps, you might teach me how to feel again, if I am brave enough to let you." The words hung between us, raw and vulnerable. I saw the fear in his eyes, the terror of a man who had lived behind walls for so long that emerging felt like stepping into enemy fire. I set down my own glass and moved to kneel before him, my skirts pooling around me. I took his hands in mine, feeling the tension in them, the barely controlled trembling. "You are brave enough," I said softly. "You have already shown me that. Every time you choose honesty over armor, you are brave. What if I hurt you?" His voice was barely a whisper. "What if I am too damaged to be anything other than what I have always been?" "Then we will be damaged together," I said, "and perhaps, between the two of us, we will make something whole." He pulled me up then, drawing me into his arms with a desperation that took my breath away. He held me as though I might disappear, as though I was the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly become uncertain. I wrapped my arms around him and held on just as tightly, feeling his heart beating against mine, fast and hard and alive. We stood like that for a long time, two broken people clinging to each other in the firelight. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I do not know how to do this," he admitted. "How to be a husband in more than name. How to let someone close without destroying them or myself. Neither do I said. "But we can learn together." He cupped my face in his hands, his thumbs tracing my cheekbones with infinite gentleness. "May I kiss you?" he asked. "Not as we did at the wedding, but truly." I nodded, unable to speak. He leaned in slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away. When his lips met mine, it was nothing like that cold, perfunctory kiss in the chapel. This was warmth and need and tentative hope. This was a question and an answer. This was the beginning of something neither of us had dared to imagine. When we parted, we were both breathing hard. He rested his forehead against mine, his hands still cradling my face. "I am afraid," he whispered. "So am I whispered back. But we stayed there, holding each other, choosing courage over fear, choosing to begin again, not as Duke and Duchess bound by contract, but as Adrian and Eveline, two people reaching across the darkness towards something that might, with care and time, become love. The following weeks were a revelation. We spent our days together, learning each other's rhythms and preferences. He showed me the estate's account books, explained the investments and business decisions that kept Greystone solvent. I was surprised by how much he trusted me with this information, how he valued my thoughts on matters he could have easily kept to himself. In return, I shared with him the small poetry I had been writing, the observations I had hidden in the bottom of the escritoire drawer. He read them with careful attention, and when he looked up, his eyes were soft with understanding. "You see the world with such clarity," he said, "such compassion. I have spent so long focused on power and position that I forgot to simply see." "You are learning," I said, "because you are teaching me." We established small rituals, morning rides when the weather permitted, afternoon tea in the library, evening walks through the conservatory where the winter roses bloomed in defiance of the cold. We talked about everything and nothing, politics and poetry, childhood memories and dreams for the future. The conversations were not always easy. Sometimes we stumbled into old hurts, old defenses, but we were learning to lower our guards, to be vulnerable with each other. One evening, as we walked among the roses, he took my hand. It was such a simple gesture, but it felt momentous. His fingers laced through mine, warm and strong, and I felt a surge of emotion so powerful it made me dizzy. "Eveline," he said, stopping in the center of the conservatory. "I need to tell you something." I turned to face him, my heart beating faster. "What is it?" He took a deep breath, as though gathering courage. "When I married you, I thought I was incapable of love. I thought that part of me had died when my mother passed, that my father's coldness had frozen whatever warmth I might have possessed. But these past weeks with you have shown me I was wrong. He moved closer, his free hand coming up to cup my cheek. I am falling in love with you, Eveline. It terrifies me, and I do not know how to do it properly, but it is happening nonetheless. Tears spilled down my cheeks. I had not realized how much I needed to hear those words until he spoke them. I had been so careful not to hope, not to imagine that this marriage of convenience might become something real. Adrian, I whispered, I am falling in love with you too. He kissed me then, deep and passionate, and I felt the last of his walls crumble. When we pulled apart, we were both trembling. Come to me tonight, he said quietly. Not out of duty, but because you want to. Because we choose this. I nodded, unable to speak past the emotion clogging my throat. That night, when the house was quiet and the servants had retired, I went to the connecting door between our chambers. My heart was racing, my hands shaking as I tried the handle. It was unlocked. I pushed it open and found him waiting on the other side, still dressed in his shirt sleeves, his hair disheveled, his eyes full of hope and fear and desire. Eveline, he breathed. I crossed to him, and he met me halfway. We came together in the center of his chamber, our kisses urgent now, hands exploring, barriers falling away. He lifted me into his arms and carried me to his bed. And for the first time since our wedding, we became husband and wife in truth. It was tender and awkward and beautiful. We learned each other's bodies with reverence and care, taking our time, speaking in whispers and gasps and the language of touch. When it was over, we lay tangled together in the firelight, his arms around me, my head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. I love you, he said into the darkness. I will spend the rest of my life proving it to you. I already know, I whispered back. I can feel it. We fell asleep like that, two people who had been alone for so long finally finding home in each other's arms. And outside our window, the first snow of winter began to fall, covering Greystone Manor in white, making everything clean and new. The next morning, I woke to find him watching me, his expression soft with wonder. Good morning, wife, he said, and the word sounded different now. Not a title, but an endearment. Good morning, husband, I replied, and smiled at the way his eyes lit up. We spent the day in a haze of joy, stealing kisses in hallways, holding hands beneath the breakfast table, acting like besotted newlyweds rather than people bound by contract. The staff noticed, I was certain. Mrs. Hallowell's eyes were kind when she brought our tea. Even the usually stern butler seemed to soften. But all golden moments have their shadows, and ours came in the form of the dowager's return. She arrived in late afternoon, her carriage rolling up the drive like a harbinger of winter's return. Adrian and I were in the library when we heard her arrival. He squeezed my hand, a gesture of solidarity. We will face her together, he said. We met her in the entrance hall. She swept in like a storm, her eyes taking in everything, missing nothing. When her gaze landed on our joined hands, something flickered across her face. Disapproval, certainly, but also something else. Surprise, perhaps, or even the faintest hint of concern. I see things have changed in my absence, she said coldly. They have, Adrian replied, his voice firm, for the better. She studied him, then me, then him again. You are making a mistake, she said quietly. Emotion makes one vulnerable. Vulnerability makes one weak. No, grandmother. Adrian's voice was gentle but unyielding. Emotion makes one human, and I have been less than human for far too long. She said nothing more, simply swept past us toward her chambers. But I saw the tightness around her mouth, the rigid set of her shoulders, and I knew that the battle was far from over. That night, as Adrian held me close, I wondered what price we would pay for our happiness. The dowager would not accept this change easily. She had spent decades building Adrian into the perfect, emotionless duke. She would not surrender her creation without a fight. But as I felt his heartbeat beneath my palm, steady and strong, I knew that whatever came, we would face it together. We had found each other in the darkness, and no power on earth, not even the formidable Dowager Duchess, would tear us apart. Not if we refused to let go. The storm broke 3 days later, on a morning when frost covered the ground like spilled diamonds. I woke to find Adrian's side of the bed empty, the sheets already cool. I rose and dressed quickly, a sense of unease settling over me like a shroud. I found him in his study, standing before the window with a letter in his hand. His posture was rigid, his shoulders tense. When he turned at my entrance, I saw anger in his eyes, and something deeper. Hurt. "What is it?" I asked, crossing to him. He handed me the letter without a word. It was written in an elegant hand on expensive paper, sealed with a crest I did not recognize. I unfolded it and began to read. It was from a Lady Catherine Westbrook, a woman whose name I had heard whispered at our dinner party, but never fully explained. She wrote with the familiarity of someone who had every right to Adrian's attention, her words carefully constructed to wound. She congratulated him on his marriage in terms that dripped with false sweetness. She hoped his new bride was proving adequate to her duties. She mentioned, with calculated casualness, that she would be in London for the season and hoped they might renew their acquaintance. She signed it with love and remembered affection. I looked up at Adrian, my heart sinking. "Who is she?" He turned away, his jaw tight. "Someone I knew before, someone my grandmother wanted me to marry. Were you lovers?" "Yes." His voice was flat. "For 2 years, she was everything my grandmother approved of, connected, intelligent, beautiful. But she wanted me to be someone I was not. She wanted the title and the power, but not the man who came with them. And you ended it?" "No." He turned back to face me, his expression bleak. "She ended it. When she realized I would never be the passionate, demonstrative husband she desired. She told me I was incapable of real feeling, that my heart was as cold as the stone this house is built from. Then she married another man, someone who could give her the grand romantic gesture she craved." I set the letter down on his desk, my hands shaking. "Why is she writing to you now? Because she has heard that I have changed. Because society is full of gossips who have noticed that the cold Duke of Greystone is suddenly besotted with his wife." He laughed bitterly. "She wants to see if it is true. Or perhaps she wants to test whether my newfound capacity for feeling extends to jealousy. And does it?" He crossed to me in 3 strides and pulled me into his arms. "Yes," he said fiercely. "The thought of her anywhere near you, of her poison touching what we have built, makes me want to burn the letter and never set foot in London again." "Then we will not go to London," I said simply. "We must. There are business matters, parliamentary votes. I cannot avoid my responsibilities. Then we will go together, and we will show her that what we have is stronger than anything she could threaten." He held me tighter. "You are braver than I am." "No," I said, "I am simply more stubborn, and I will not let her take you from me without a fight." But the letter was only the beginning. That afternoon, the Dowager requested my presence in her private sitting room. I went with trepidation, knowing this conversation had been inevitable since her return. She sat in her usual chair, a tea service laid out before her. She poured for both of us with mechanical precision, then fixed me with those ice-chip eyes. "Sit," she commanded. I sat, my spine straight, my hands folded in my lap. "You have done what I thought impossible," she said without preamble. "You have made my grandson feel—" She spoke the last word as though it was an obscenity. "Do you understand what you have done?" "I have loved him," I said quietly, "and he has loved me in return. Love." She spat the word. "Love makes one vulnerable. It clouds judgment. It leads to mistakes and weakness. I spent 30 years building Adrian into the perfect duke, teaching him that power and duty were all that mattered. And you have undone my work in a matter of weeks." "Your work," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts at control, made him miserable. "Your work made him believe he was incapable of being loved for anything other than his title. Is that what you wanted for him? A lifetime of loneliness disguised as strength?" Her teacup clattered in its saucer. "You know nothing of what I wanted. You know nothing of what it takes to survive in this world." "Then tell me," I challenged. "Tell me why you are so determined to keep him cold and alone." She was silent for a long moment, her face a mask of stone. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I loved once, completely, recklessly, and when my husband died, it nearly destroyed me. I could not eat, could not sleep, could not think of anything but the absence he left behind." She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the human being beneath the armor. I had a son who needed me, an estate that needed managing, and all I wanted to do was follow my husband into the grave. That is what love does. It makes you weak. It makes you vulnerable to pain that can break you beyond repair. Understanding flooded through me. "So you taught Adrian never to love, so he would never hurt the way you hurt." "I taught him to survive," she corrected. "The world is cruel to those who feel too much. I wanted to spare him that pain." "But you also spared him joy," I said gently. "You spared him connection. You made him safe, but you also made him alone." She looked away, blinking rapidly. "Perhaps," she said finally, "perhaps I was wrong. But it is too late to undo what I have done." "It is never too late," I said. "Adrian is learning to feel, learning to love. But he still needs you. Not as the stern guardian, but as his grandmother. Someone who can acknowledge that strength and emotion are not enemies." She met my eyes, and for a moment the fortress cracked. "I see why he loves you," she said quietly. "You are stronger than you appear, stronger than I gave you credit for." "I am strong enough to love him," I said, "and to help him become the man he was meant to be, not cold and isolated, but warm and whole." She nodded slowly. "Then do that, child. Make him happy. And perhaps in doing so, you will teach this old woman that there is more to life than survival." It was not an apology. It was not even full acceptance, but it was a beginning. And that was enough. The journey to London came 2 weeks later. Adrian and I traveled together in the Greystone carriage, my hand in his, watching the countryside roll past. He was tense. I could feel it in the rigid set of his shoulders, the tightness of his grip. "We will only stay 3 days," he promised. "Long enough to attend to business and make the necessary appearances. Then we will return home." "Home," I repeated and smiled. Greystone Manor had become home somehow. The cold house had warmed, or perhaps I had simply learned to see the warmth that had always been there, hidden beneath the surface. London was loud and crowded and overwhelming. Our townhouse was grand but impersonal, a place for conducting business rather than living. We settled in quickly, and that evening we attended a ball given by Lord Pemberton. I wore a gown of deep emerald silk, the Greystone emeralds at my throat. Adrian was resplendent in black and silver. We entered the ballroom together, and I felt every eye turn toward us. The whispers began immediately. The cold Duke and his mysterious bride. The marriage that had shocked society. Everyone wanted to see if the rumors were true. Lady Catherine Westbrook was there, of course. She stood near the windows, surrounded by admirers, her beauty on full display. She wore crimson silk that clung to her figure, diamonds glittering at her ears and throat. When she saw us, her eyes narrowed and a smile curved her lips that did not reach her eyes. She approached us with the confidence of a woman who had never been denied anything she wanted. "Your Grace," she purred, offering her hand to Adrian. "How wonderful to see you." And this must be your bride." Adrian's hand tightened on my arm. "Lady Catherine," he said coolly, "may I present my wife, Eveline, Duchess of Greystone?" I curtsied with icy politeness. "Lady Catherine." She looked me over with the same assessing gaze I had received from so many others, but hers held something darker. "Calculation, cruelty. How charming," she said. "I can see why Greystone chose you. You have a certain quality, provincial perhaps, but refreshing." The insult was clear. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, but I kept my voice steady. "You are too kind, Lady Catherine." She turned to Adrian, her hand reaching out to touch his arm. "We must speak later, darling. There are so many things I wish to discuss with you, old times to reminisce about." "I think not," Adrian said, his voice hard as steel. "My wife and I have engagements this evening, if you will excuse us." He guided me away before she could respond. We moved through the crowd, and I felt his anger radiating from him like heat. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "I should have anticipated that she would approach us." "She is nothing," I said firmly. "She is simply a woman who cannot bear to see you happy without her." He stopped and turned to face me, there in the middle of the ballroom with everyone watching. "Eveline," he said, his voice carrying in the sudden silence. "I need to say something. I need everyone here to understand." "Adrian," I whispered, suddenly nervous. "What are you doing?" He took both my hands in his gray eyes fierce with emotion. "I married you for practical reasons," he said, his voice ringing out clear and strong. "I married you because I needed a wife and you needed security. But I fell in love with you because you are brave and kind and you saw something in me worth saving. You taught me that power means nothing without heart, that strength is nothing without compassion. You made me human again." The ballroom was utterly silent. Every eye was fixed on us. I could feel the weight of their attention, the shock and curiosity and judgment. But all I could see was Adrian, my husband, the man who had learned to open his heart. "I love you, Eveline," he said, "more than duty, more than title, more than anything I have ever valued. And I want everyone here to know that you are not simply the Duchess of Greystone. You are the woman who saved me from a life of cold isolation. You are my wife, my love, my heart." Tears streamed down my face. I did not care that we were in public, that society was watching. I threw my arms around him and kissed him with all the passion and love I felt, and he kissed me back just as fiercely. When we pulled apart, the ballroom erupted in applause. Not the polite, restrained applause of society, but genuine, warm appreciation. Lady Pemberton was beaming. Even the most jaded lords and ladies looked moved. I glanced toward where Lady Catherine had been standing. She was gone, vanished into the crowd, unable to watch the evidence of what she had thrown away. Adrian cupped my face in his hands. "I am not ashamed of loving you," he said softly. "I want the world to know." "I am not ashamed either," I whispered. "I am proud, proud to be your wife, proud to love you, proud of the man you have become." We danced then, our first real dance together, moving across the floor in perfect synchrony, and I realized that this was what I had been waiting for. Not wealth or title or security, but this, the freedom to love and be loved without reservation, the courage to be vulnerable and know that I would be held safe. When we returned to Greystone Manor 3 days later, it felt different. The house seemed to welcome us, the cold stone walls somehow warmer. The dowager met us in the entrance hall, and to my surprise, she embraced Adrian. It was brief, awkward, but genuine. "I heard what you did in London," she said. "The whole city is talking about it." "Let them talk," Adrian replied. She looked at me, and something like approval flickered in her eyes. "You have made him happy," she said. "I did not think it was possible, but you have done it." She paused. "Thank you, child." It was the closest thing to an apology I would ever receive from her. I accepted it with grace. The months that followed were the happiest of my life. Adrian and I built a partnership that went beyond marriage. We managed the estate together, made decisions together, laughed together. We argued sometimes, passionate disagreements that ended in passionate reconciliations. We learned each other's fears and dreams and hopes. In the spring, I discovered I was with child. When I told Adrian, he wept. They were tears of joy and fear and wonder. He placed his hand on my still flat stomach and whispered promises to the life growing there. Promises to be present, to be loving, to be the father his own father had never been. Our daughter was born in October, 1 year and 1 week after our wedding. We named her Eleanor, after Adrian's mother. She had his dark hair and my blue eyes, and the moment I held her, I understood the dowager's fear. Because the love I felt for this tiny, perfect being was so intense, it terrified me. If anything happened to her, it would destroy me. But it was also the most beautiful thing I had ever felt. Adrian was a devoted father. He held Eleanor for hours, singing to her in a voice rusty from disuse. He walked the floors with her at night when she cried. He read to her from books of poetry before she could possibly understand the words. He was gentle and patient, and so full of love it transformed him completely. The dowager softened too. She would visit the nursery and hold Eleanor with a tenderness that stunned me. Sometimes I would catch her watching Adrian with his daughter, and there would be tears in her eyes. Tears for the grandson she had tried to harden, and relief that he had found his way back to softness. On our second wedding anniversary, Adrian and I stood in the conservatory among the winter roses. Eleanor slept upstairs, watched over by her doting grandmother. We were alone in the quiet beauty of that glass-walled room. "Do you remember what you said to me on our wedding night?" Adrian asked, his arms around me. "I said many things," I replied. "You asked me if I was not going to consummate the marriage." He smiled at the memory. "And I left you alone because I could not bear to be another man who took without asking, who treated you as an object rather than a person. That was the night I began to love you," I confessed. "When you showed me mercy when you had no obligation to do so." He kissed my forehead. "And you began to save me that night, with a single tear that broke through my armor and showed me I was still capable of feeling." We stood there in the candlelight, surrounded by roses, and I marveled at the journey we had taken, from strangers bound by contract to lovers bound by choice, from isolation to intimacy, from cold duty to warm devotion. "I was sold into marriage to save my family," I said softly. "But somewhere along the way, I found something worth more than security or title. I found love. I found home. I found you. And I married for power," he replied. "But I discovered that the only power worth having is the power to love and be loved. You taught me that, Eveline. You taught me everything that matters." We kissed then, slow and sweet. A kiss that held 2 years of learning and loving and becoming. A kiss that promised decades more of the same. Outside the conservatory windows, snow began to fall. But inside, surrounded by blooming roses and the warmth of Adrian's embrace, I felt nothing but spring. The winter of our beginning had passed. We had weathered the frost and emerged into sunlight. Our daughter would grow up knowing love. She would see her parents laugh and argue and choose each other every day. She would learn that strength and tenderness were not opposites but partners. She would never doubt that she was wanted, cherished, adored. And someday, when she was old enough, I would tell her the story. How her father married her mother for power, but learned that love was the only power worth possessing. How a single tear on a cold wedding night had begun the slow work of melting a frozen heart. How 2 people who had every reason to remain strangers chose instead to become partners, lovers, friends. I would tell her that fairy tales do not always begin with once upon a time. Sometimes they begin with duty and necessity and resigned acceptance. But if you are brave enough, if you are patient enough, if you are willing to see past the armor to the hurting soul beneath, Sometimes those stories end with love. Real love. Hard-won love. The kind of love that transforms everything. Adrian pulled me closer, and I rested my head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. That heart that I had thought was stone, that had proven to be simply guarded, waiting for someone patient enough to unlock it. "I love you," he whispered into my hair. "I love you," I whispered back. And in that moment, surrounded by roses and snow and the promise of all the years to come, I knew that we had found what so many people spend lifetimes searching for. Not perfection, not the absence of struggle, but something far more valuable. We had found each other, and we had chosen every day to keep finding each other, to keep choosing love over fear, vulnerability over armor, warmth over cold. The merciless Duke had married me for power, but my tears, my tenderness, my stubborn refusal to accept his coldness had shattered his pride. And in the ruins of that pride, we had built something far more enduring. A love that would last all our days. A home that was not made of stone, but of heartbeats and whispered promises and roses that bloomed in winter. We had begun in autumn, cold and dying. But we would live in perpetual spring, forever growing, forever blooming, forever choosing the brave and beautiful act of loving each other. And that, I thought, as Adrian kissed me again beneath the glass roof with snow falling all around us, that was the greatest power of all.